started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Mobility Forum. My name is Jinhua Zhao, Professor of Cities and Transportation at MIT. In 2023, we launched the sub-series of the Mobility Forum titled the Women Leaders in Transportation. It aims to celebrate, advance, and inspire the contribution of women in the ever-changing landscape of transportation and mobility. Hyun-A Park has kindly agreed to join me as the co-host. In the first sub-series, we invited Laura Chase, Hyun-A, Victoria Sheehan, Holly Trottenberg as the first cohort of the sub-series. And today, we have a panel of pioneering women at the forefront of mobility, AI, and public infrastructure. Robin Chase, Kristin White, and Sampriti Bhattacharyya. I wouldn't give a more detailed introduction given we'll have invited each of you to actually introduce yourself, talk about your history there. But what we'll talk about is really focus on how is technology transforming transportation and what does it mean for women, both as an innovator and as users. For example, how would this emerging transportation mode, sharing, micro, autonomous vehicle, can better serve the travel pattern of women and caregivers? How would the role of AI and data in public sector decision-making changes and the risk of algorithm biases when diverse perspectives are missing from the table? For example, the innovation in marine and advanced transportation technology with what type of inclusive design to help women and caregivers. And also the return to office trend, workforce policy, how does specifically impact women in these scenarios? Without further ado, let me pass the forum to Hyun-A Park. Hyun-A, please.
Okay, thank you, Jinhua. Just a bit about me. I'm Hyun-A Park, president of SpyPalm Partners, a transportation management consulting firm. I'm also a graduate of MIT with both a bachelor's and master's in urban planning and design. I've served on the MIT Corporation and have chaired both the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department and the Department of Urban Studies and Planning visiting committees. I'm also active with the Transportation Research Board and have served as the chair of the Technical Activities Council and as an ex officio member of the Executive Committee. My work and passion is about delivering the most impactful value to our travelers and communities. I love that we have this panel today featuring such an awesome group of women who are leaders in transportation and technology. It's so important that we get more women in transportation leadership, making decisions so that transportation value is for a greater portion of our community. So with that, now I'd like to turn it over to each of our speakers for introductory remarks. So let's start with Robin.
Hyun-A, do you mind add one remark? I really want to say a particular thank you to Hyun-A Park. She really is the close friends of the Mobility Initiative. And this whole sub-series of women in transportation is Hyun-A's idea. So thank you, Hyun-A, for making this happen.
Happy to do it. All right, Robin, let's start with you.
Okay, I'm laughing that I have the most gray hair of my panelists, but I do think it's a really interesting question to think about how you got to where you go. So I'm going to share my screen, which is an embarrassment, because I want to amuse you by my aging over the years. And I'll go very quickly because I want to do this quickly. So I first started in transportation in 2000 when I was 42 years old. Before that, I worked in public health, and I was co-founder and CEO of Zipcar and a car sharing company. The first one, I think we also introduced the sharing economy and using technology. Then I tried my hand at GoLoco in 2007. That company the idea was we were going to take advantage of cell phones, social media, ease of things to do ride sharing, real ride sharing. And after 2 years, that did not succeed. I gave my investors half the money back and closed it. And we haven't seen a successful ride sharing in the US since then. In 2010, I went to Paris and launched BuzzCar, peer-to-peer car sharing. And after several years there, I was not #1 in the city. We merged with Drivey, and Drivey moved with GetAround, and GetAround just recently went bankrupt. There's other businesses that do this. It's a hard business. Then in 2012, I co-founded a company that did vehicle mesh networks out of Portugal and the US. That company went for about 7 or 8 years, and then with the beginning of the pandemic, it got sold. In 2015, I wrote a book, Peers Inc., that is how people and platforms are inventing the collaborative economy and reinventing capitalism. And it was really looking at the platform economy and gig economy and what that really means, and types of companies we do today that are built on platforms. In 2019, I co-founded NUMO, the New Urban Mobility Alliance, out of Washington, D.C., my first nonprofit. And that continues today, led by Harriet Tregoning, who happens to be on this call. And this I'm just going to show you, not talk about, since I do have all these gray hairs, I have been on a lot of boards and committees over the years. And I love transportation. And as I will say in the future, it really is the center of everything. And I just adore this sector. So once I got into it, I got stuck. That's me.
Thank you, Robin. Let's turn it over to Kristin.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues and friends. Thank you to MIT for convening us today and talking about one of our collectively favorite topics, is empowering more women and diverse perspectives in this industry. My name is Kristin White. I am currently at Google. I'm actually here right on the newest Google campus here in Mountain View, California, where the heart of global innovation lies, and we're not biased. That is pure fact. I am new to Google. I am 3 months in as we are starting this year Google for Transportation. So we are leading a new strategy and partnership called Google for Transportation under the auspices of Google Public Sector, which is a 2-year-old formation of Alphabet and Google corporate entities to really use the vast resources of Google to invest in public sector mission. And that is something that I am very passionate about in my career, because I just finished about a 20-year career in state, local, and federal service. And as the lovely and esteemed Jinhua, Zhao, and MIT folks asked us to answer the question, how did we get here? I want to take you a little bit on that journey, but it first focuses in 3 key areas. First is really building meaningful relationships. And I'm so thrilled to see friends both here on camera and in the chat. That is how we get where we are. 2, through showcasing our work through social platforms like LinkedIn and leveraging the ability to share who we are and what we do. And then 3rd is really being open to saying yes. And so my journey to come to Google was a long one. I am from rural South Dakota, where public transportation is certainly not something that was widely available when I grew up in the 80s. And I originally actually wanted to be a teacher. But at that time in South Dakota, teachers were 51st in the country for teacher pay after Puerto Rico. And so my parents sat me down and said, if you want to serve in the public good, we need you to actually make some money, honey. And that was really disheartening, but it helped me focus on another form of work, which I started in my career, which is advocacy and law. And so I started my career in law. I went and worked as a Fulbright Fellow in Japan, where the Japanese Chikotetsu, the Tokyo system, which is on this cup and mug of mine, is one of the most beautiful, intricate, and complicated systems in the globe. And I learned very quickly through the help of Japanese friends that if you can navigate a system as complex as Japan's Chikotetsu in Tokyo, you can absolutely navigate a complex field like this, even if you're a woman and face much steeper learning curves than our colleagues of different genders and identities. And so with that, I had a wonderful mentor who, when I was working in private law, said, you know, you can bring your abilities and skills into the public sector. And so I was living in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the time, and Minneapolis is a pioneer in innovative mobility, and I joined the city at that time. And then the I-35W bridge collapsed in Minnesota in 2007. 13 people lost their lives. And at that time, the state of Minnesota did not actually have a convened chief counsel's office with lawyers to help advocate for those that needed to be advocated for. And so I joined the state of Minnesota, and I helped build out the chief counsel's office. And I had to learn, as we all do in transportation, a wide variety of areas of practice. So for me as a lawyer, I had to learn environmental transportation law and the NEPA system. I had to learn contracts and procurement. And most importantly, at that time, we were talking about things like artificial intelligence, automation, connected vehicles, and how they were going to be impacting our system. And so our governor and commissioner at the time said, you know what, Kristin, we need someone who's willing to take risks, who's innovative, and who's willing to just be out there. And that's how we founded the Connected and Automated Vehicle Program in Minnesota. And with that, we started leveraging a national showcase to work with other states, the federal government, organizations like ITS America, to really convene across public and private sectors. And we did things folks had never done, or built off the great work of folks that are both on this call and in the chat, to make sure that mobility and innovation in the future is going to be inclusive and accessible and affordable. And with that, I was asked to join the ITS America nonprofit founded by Congress in Washington, D.C. right during the pandemic. And that work led to me be asked by the administration to join as the Federal Highway Administration's chief counsel. And that led me to be the youngest administrator of the Federal Highway Administration and the first openly queer administrator. So I'm very proud of my network and accomplishments. But again, to Robin's point, none of those would have happened without the folks on this call, without the thought leadership of MIT and all of you sharing your thought leadership and empowering me and women like me to use our voice, to build our relationships and showcase our work. And so I can't wait to continue this conversation. And thank you, Hyun-A, for joining us here and being a leader yourself.
Thank you, Kristin. All right, Sampriti.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me here, and always so wonderful to connect with MIT. It always feels like home, right? Well, so I'm Sampriti. I am, a roboticist, aerospace engineer, I would say, technologist who loves solving hard tech problems by training, and also MIT alumni. PhD alum in mechanical engineering with Harry Asada. I specialized doing underwater drones and robotics during my grad school. Very, very interesting and cool panel. And, my background is very non-traditional, I would say. I grew up in India, in a world where women aren't exactly encouraged to build machines, and, went to a small community college. My path was going to be pretty traditional. I don't think there was startups or maybe a job or not a job in the in the future lined up. But through various adventures, one in several hundreds email took me on my first airplane ride to the United States when by myself with $200 when I was 20 years old, and got me introduced to the world of building things, from high energy physics to my dream was aerospace. I always have read about NASA and ended up actually as an aerospace engineer, worked at NASA out here actually in Mountain View on flight controls, as well as a nuclear engineer designing new kind of nuclear reactors, and then eventually got into MIT in mechanical engineering, initially building underwater drones for boiling water reactor system. But if any of you remember when the Malaysian airline got lost in 2014, that's what really turned my attention to maritime. And what I realized is people are talking about going to Moon and Mars, but here's 70% of the world. The future of food, energy, trade, everything's here, but we know nothing about it. And that was really what got me interested, and seeing the technology stacks that's really transforming the land and aerospace environment, whether that's cheaper, faster computing and sensing, scalable manufacturing, and electrification. I was convinced that if you apply that technology stack to maritime, it will fundamentally change. I mean, it won't just have an incremental progress, but a step function progress in this sector, and will really help us to reinvent this industry and reinvent how people and goods move through the water. And if you can design next generation vessels that can efficiently move people and goods at a fraction of the cost, minimizing per nautical mile, per unit cost of payload on the water, then you can turn waterways into highways of tomorrow. And the opportunity seemed very big. So that led me, from underwater drones to starting Navia, which is named, those who like a little bit of a nerd joke. It's named after Claude Louis-Navier of the Navier-Stokes equation in fluid dynamics. But let me to start Navier, which is really focused on building a next generation American maritime company with, where we are building scalable, efficient vessels that that are step function cheaper to operate. And you can think about that, no seasickness, quiet. And, those who have been to San Francisco, you don't have to go from Redwood City to, let's say, Berkeley in 1.5 hours, but rather 20 minutes. A world where every marina can be a transportation hub. So that's really, the first step towards building Navier. But, obviously, sector, especially shipping and maritime, there aren't really any women. Even the company I have almost 50, 60 people. There's probably me and 2 more people, but it's really hard to get more talent in the area. But we are trying. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Sampriti. And yes, encouragement for all of you in the audience to support women leadership and encourage them to continue to rise in their organizations. All right, let's move to our first kind of question for the panel. So, so technology is transforming how we move through shared mobility, AI, and even new forms of transport like autonomous and marine systems, as we heard from Sampriti. As leaders in this space, how do you see innovation either closing or widening gender gaps in transportation access, design, and impact? Let's start with Sampriti, and then we'll go to Robin and then Kristin.
So I guess we are talking about how it's impacting equality. That's the focus.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't think that it's, I don't think that it's technology that creates or solves inequality, right? It's people do. It's people who solves it. It's people who creates it, right? So I think it's easy to put it on technology. So I mean, what I think is, when you're devising a system that is addressing, both sides of the population, you have to include diverse views, because public transit is, not just about, I mean, as we are building a public transportation network, right? We are building scalable, high-speed water transit. So it's not about just men. It's used by men and women. And so I think how each of them use it matters. The data matters, and as we look at it, we look at the user experience. We are studying a lot in the transit side of things, that, how people in general, like, when we are looking at multimodal transportation, all of that comes into play. But also, like, I mean, I think I've done a lot of autonomy stuff. I mean, I think training data, especially when you're looking at autonomous cars and such, also matters a lot, right? And that's where a lot of the things where if you don't have a bit of a, I would say, inclusive training data, not biased, but that's where, I guess that's where the issues happen. So I think it is more about being mindful and understanding that who your users are and being intentional as you build systems and architecture.
Thanks, Sampriti. Yeah, I think about it. How many of you have seen the movie Picture a Scientist? That was a documentary that came out of the MIT Press, but it's talking about how the earlier AI models weren't able to see women and people of color because the models were trained on white men. And so just as you think about, we're always designing as we are formulating whatever new products, and the sensitivity, the greater the diversity of people who are contributing to that design, you're considering the needs of the various people who they represent. So I think that's
I'll just add one line to it. My first boats are for recreational buyers, and trust me, nobody has seen a brown Indian woman driving a boat. There's no picture of that in the internet. So you can imagine when I go to a trade fair, how that works out.
yeah. All right, Robin.
So if I think about technology and it's how it makes things more inclusive, I'd say that's been the basis of most of my work, is that the old, if we talk about people transportation, not delivery, we're moving people. We have a car first situation here in the US and elsewhere. And when I think about cars as a major mode of transportation, it's monomodal. And it's very simple. You own the car and then you drive it where you want. But you also have to have a driver's license. You have to have money to do those things. And so I think about technology and how it's really expanded the ability to live multimodal lives and to take advantage of those modes. And so to be specific, people don't like taking public transit because discovery is hard, payment is hard. When do I get on or off? With technology, we can do all that. And living a multimodal life, being able to choose between those modes has been facilitated by technology. So it's really transformed who can lead a multimodal life. And that for me is inclusive. So now children, old people, people without money, people without driver's licenses, they can now take increasing advantage of these multiple modes. So I see it as a way to dramatically enhance who can use transportation. And I haven't mentioned people who can't have driver's licenses because they're blind or disabled, right? So it's really has built this enormous inclusiveness. So I want to say technology widens the possibility, but then to be a little bit negative, because there's negatives, is technology is digitizing our trips and our transportation. And with that digitization comes the ability, because we have very poor privacy laws, to have a surveillance state that is very easy to take advantage of at all levels within a company and within governments, as we can see where you got on, where you got off, movements, and that gives me a lot of concern. So there's pluses and minuses, but I want to say on balance, I think it's been a great thing, and I'm really happy about it.
Thanks, Robin. Kristin.
Well, I would like to take a step back and just remind us of the statistics, which are dire. So before the pandemic, the United Nations does a global report on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, right? And one of those top 5 goals is gender equity worldwide. And before the pandemic, they estimated it would take the United States 200 years to achieve gender equality. And that is related to a wide variety of things, right? Workplace equity, financial equity, political representation, education, and other factors. Post-pandemic, colleagues and friends, we are now at 308 years. It will be multi-generational investment until my great-great-great-great-grandchildren see equity. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but there's 2 that I want to kind of call out in our industry. First and foremost is I'm going to ask a question, and many of you who have heard me speak will know what I'm about to ask is, who on this call can name the 6 steps of human-centered design? If we are unable as an industry to understand what the core concept of putting people at the heart of problem solving is, which again is why I moved to the Bay Area in California, because Stanford, I'm sorry, Jinhua and friends, I know one of your competitors, but you're also steeped in HCD at MIT. They were pioneers in this. And and I'm looking at some of the conversation in the chat, if we are going to create an inclusive environment, technologically or not, it is going to start with the first step of human-centered design, which is called empathetic inquiry. It's literally asking, what is the lived experience of the people I am trying to serve? And at Google, I'm not just serving the customers and the public agencies, the federal government, the state agencies, the MPOs, and the local county engineer. I am serving the traveling public. All of us have a transportation story. The reason I'm so passionate about human-centered design and putting people at the place of problem solving is because I've had 5 people in my life die due to car crashes, including my paternal grandfather. And the technology that Google has invented just in the last 2 years would have prevented his life from being killed. So we have a moral imperative to make sure that we have diversity of thought in these conversations, because it's not just up to any one gender, any one discipline, any one age group, any one ability group to solve these problems. It takes all of us in the second and third phases of human-centered design to refine the actual problem statement and to ideate and brainstorm solutions. Because I think many of us have been in conversations either with a technology company, unlike Google, maybe some of our competitors, where we've sat through trying to empathize with what the problem might be, but we actually don't refine the problem statement and get it right. And then we start moving down the solutionizing process and we say, was that even a problem we needed to solve and develop technology for? Or importantly, we didn't brainstorm every single potential solution and realize that sometimes it's the most simple solution, like a protected bike lane, that can save vulnerable road users who are seeing a 17% spike in deaths nationally in the United States. So for me, human-centered design is very important to make sure all voices are at the table, or we just eliminate the table and go to people where they are. And the second thing I think is really important is, and I heard Robin and Sampriti mention this, is very often we don't have a technology problem. We have a people and process problem. So one of the reasons I left the federal government and came to Google, of all places, is because we have some of the world's most foremost capabilities. And I want to call out one of my friends and colleagues, Andrew Stover, and our Geo team, because they are literally using some of the world's most incredible research in advanced AI to help make sure people have information they need on a smartphone to get them where they need to go. We can do that in real time. We can predict crashes, friends, in real time. We can actually redeploy emergency responders in my state of California and reduce emergency response times by 8 to 11 minutes with AI and technology that's been developed in the last year and a half. But what we don't have is a process to make sure all people know about these technologies, a process to fund all of these technologies, and to make sure everyone is capable of using them. And those are people and process issues. And it takes a collaborative, like all of us on the screen and in the chat and with the leadership of MIT, to make sure we can fix those latter 2 problems.
Thank you, Kristin. Okay, let's go to the next round. And so from AI bias to return to office trends and shrinking public sector investment, what systemic challenges concern you most when it comes to gender equity in transportation? And where do you see opportunities for the tech sector to lead change? Let's start with Kristin on this one.
Thank you, Hyun-A. And I really want to first and foremost appreciate and with a note of gratitude, honor the incredible allies and women and people of color and different identities on this call, because it takes all of us to be able to answer that question. And so I'm just sharing my perspective, not necessarily the perspective of Google's, but I see it in 2 key ways. One is we see an enormous lack of women in leadership in this field. And I really want to credit Robin is a name to be known friend. So I'm just even honored to follow in her footsteps. And Robin, I will say I do dye my grays, so they're there, but really, like, it's really me following in the footsteps of incredible seminal leaders like Robin and many others who are on this call. And in the last 20 years, Mineta Transportation Institute, our colleagues down in Southern California, do research that shows us that the number of women in either transportation jobs or in leadership has not statistically increased over 3% in nearly 2 decades. And that is due to 2 things. And this is where WTS in the Bay Area is a great leader with McKinsey & Company and in their own reporting that says the systemic problems are twofold. First is we have a broken rung. It is really hard for frontline early professionals, women or people of color, to move from that junior role into the very first promotional role. It's really hard. The ladder for predominantly, cisgender white men, if you look at the ladder, they can climb it up it with relatively fewer hurdles. But the broken rung means we might have 4 rungs before we actually have an ally or a mentor or have to lead the organization before we can get a promotion. That is why we don't have women in leadership. And the McKinsey and Lean In report, which again takes place every year, and I encourage everyone to remember it, read it, and learn the statistics, says that we need sponsorship to help overcome both the broken rung and the lack of women in our field. And sponsorship is very different than mentoring, which many of us do informally or formally. Sponsorship is saying you're using your power to advocate for the women and people of color and others not even when they're not in the room. It's asking folks like my mentees, I'll say, what are your career goals? How can I support you? How can I get my network to be your network? And how do I make sure I get you that job? It is using my power to ensure that everyone behind me looks very different and more diverse than me. And so that's one of the first things. And the second I would just have to say, as I conclude my remarks on this, is company like Google's really are pioneering in this space. It's another reason I wanted to join the world's 4th largest company. We're a very inclusive company. Despite anything you might read online, internally, our teams are very diverse. And the second thing is we want to disagree with the idea, not with the person, to get to the right outcome. And that is very important in our field because I don't see a lot of opportunity for us to really debate ideas. Too often we bring our ego into the room. And the third thing that Google reminds us is we need to think big, act small, but stay humble. And friends, in the technology industry, for certain gender and other identities, humility is something we should all learn, embody, and embrace because women, research shows, are more empathetic. There goes that human-centered design first step. But women also have an opportunity to sit straighter, use our voice, and advocate for what we need. And that's why I'm so thrilled to be here today. Thanks again.
Thanks, Kristin. Let's turn to Sampriti.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, when we talked about challenges, I think we already touched upon the basics, right? Like the defaults that you have in assumption, like extrapolation, right? Which ends up excluding important data, whether that is, training data when you're building your technology, like autonomous cars, could be autonomous boats, right? As we are building them and not thinking is, of people who are part of the society, but since, systems are built by only one gender, they often forget to include the viewpoint or the user experience or the use cases of the other side of the population, right? So again, that's a challenge that, over and over that we see in technology, the default, like, well, when you think of like dropping off if you are in a Waymo, right? Are you dropping off a woman in the right neighborhood or like understanding this kind of things, right? Especially if you live in San Francisco. So how do you take all these kind of things into consideration, right? In a person-driven car, if I'm being dropped off and, something looks, fishy, like I know there's a person who's looking out for me, but what do you do when cars become autonomous, for example? But there are some of these things, like how do you the training data is a big part of like the issues that we are talking about, and how do you make that more inclusive and take the perspective of other side of the population, right? The half of the population. So that means like, just being aware of the problem and again, including more women into it so that, that's a different perspective and viewpoint. And I think in general, better decisions get made when you have diverse viewpoints. So I don't think diversity should be considered for the sake of diversity, which, gets a bad name. I actually think there is merit in diversity, which is bringing different viewpoints and not having a, singular line of thinking, right? Now, what are the challenges, as we are thinking of women in transportation? Well, I'll give you my personal story. I mean, I run a deep tech company. I run a factory. I build vehicles that are, complex 30-feet machines. And basically, there's no woman in this field. There are no women building, large complex factories, machines. And it's also really hard to recruit women in this field. And I'll give you why. First of all, breaking into this field is right. These are very small circles, and they are, usually just men. If you look at defense tech, hard tech, transportation techs, they are like small circles. So there is that thing that, you have to establish your network, your ally, your group, right? And I think that's why, especially things like this, and the mobility initiative you guys organize, it's like bringing groups together, exchanging ideas, forming allies. That becomes very, very important. Something I actively do also, I do bring founders together. I do bring women founders together. Like in the ventures things, you will see like guys are passing deals between each other. How do you do the similar kind of have that mindset between, both established leaders as well as upcoming leaders in the, especially like, sectors like transportation. And the other part that I will also personally say that, when, women, especially in my age, and especially when they're in their mid-30s, late 30s, it's the challenge that I have seen firsthand is like, when they're having kids, family, like how do you, especially in my kind of job, it's a 16, 18 hours some days I'm spending in the factory, especially, like getting things out. So the kind of the work is, you're living in San Francisco, you have to be a caregiver or like, thinking of future family. Like, I think the workplace and the systems are still not set up for that. So how do we say like, hey, like, how do we make that feasible where people can have great families, but, and especially where women play such a big role, but also can be exceptional leaders, right? And not penalize them for that. And it's something I am new to, but I am thinking because I am experiencing and seeing it firsthand. Because I think, there are women who are exceptionally smart and brilliant and should not be penalized when they are, thinking of like how to balance between choosing families and also having an exceptional career in a leadership position. So these are, I think the opportunities are plenty, but again, you have to take active, intentional steps and recognize that there is a problem. I think having more clarity towards the problem rather than a very, hey, we just need women in the workplace, but like why, and we need talents. And many of these talents happen to be very talented women. And how do we get the most talented people to work in this and then figure out the solution to like, solve whatever challenges we need to solve to bring them on board? I think that's more of the way I see the approach should be.
Thanks, Sampriti. All right, Robin.
I feel like Sampriti, you and I will have to talk some other time on some of the topics about child rearing while building a career. But to answer Hyun-A's question, I look at it and I've been thinking, I appreciate that both of you have jobs that you have to care about, saying things right now, and I feel like I can say things that are more challenging, which is to say the current administration is extremely male-dominated and has done everything it can do to take out any kind of diverse voice. And I want to say women's voices, as well as different backgrounds and skin colors and cultures. And they also are extremely car dominated, as in what's great, cars are great, and everything around cars and personally owned cars are great, and everything else is off the table. So I look at the times we are living in right at this minute, and I'm trying to be pragmatic. And wait, I just want to say one more thing about this male dominance, is that we're reverting to 1950s and 1960s ways of thinking about transportation, planning, building, infrastructure companies. And what a terrible thing that 20% of all trips are commute trips, and that's what traditionally has been thought about, is men getting to work. And all the 80% of the other trips taken primarily by women and children. But today, I want to say we have work from home, but by diverse caregivers, all of that was irrelevant because we really just focused on how do people get to and from work. So I am dismayed. I think we're going backwards. I think it's the wrong time for those things. But trying to think ahead, what can we do about that? So I want to say I'm being politically pragmatic. I'm not saying things that lots of other approaches. But I've been really focused on the idea of child mobility, and that regardless of what your political ideas are, or whether you are, red or blue, where you live, urban or rural, I think all parents have a real burden of getting their kids from the age of, I want to say, potential autonomy, 9 on, and mothers in particular are chauffeurs all the time. And so I look and I think, can we put a focus on how do we get children to school safely? How do we not have to, I've been reading on social media, I hear complaints of parents spending 30 to 40 minutes stuck in the line of getting their kids to school, the pick up and drop off. So I think there's this real opportunity for us to address what I would look at as the toehold and the infrastructure for sustainable mobility by focusing on how can we increase autonomy for children? How can they walk to school, bike to school, take transit to school where that's possible? And I think that should be something that's appealing, if said the right way, to all sorts of people. So that was just one opportunity. And the other opportunity I've been thinking about, which I mentioned just at the beginning of this call before we got on, was the tariffs that are being applied to everything, including car manufacturing, that in other countries, a way to push people to minimize their car travel and to choose other modes has been putting really high prices on the costs of cars. And so we are doing that right now for other reasons and in other ways as a government. And so it's interesting for me to think about how can we leverage that in a careful narrative of how people can have other choices and more autonomy without having to buy an expensive second car, only have that as a reliance. So anyway, those are two angles I've been thinking about as we look at this increasingly undiverse political regime that we are living under.
Thank you, Robin. Jinhua?
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for the panel and Hyun-A organizing this. Before I give the forum to Zhao, I just say one thing to the audience. Please, I do want, there's a lot of talent in the audience. I like encourage everyone in the audience, share one observation in your own life about the challenges that women facing in transportation. You can write it as a user of the system or as an innovator system. Either way would be great. Yeah, I will synthesize them as a kind of knowledge collected from the audience, right? Second thing is about the tariff, or just a quick announcement. Next week, we'll talk about the trade tariff, the trade war, and the global car industry coming Friday. Then I think maybe, yeah, give it to John, but also later we'll see the panel, your response to each other's remarks. Maybe toward the end of it, we'll hear what's your response on that to Zhao.
Okay, thanks everyone. And there are some great comments in the chat file, which we will certainly share with all of you. Just before we get into the questions, maybe just a quick reflection from my side. I want to make a quick shout out to Robin, who I first met at a cafe in Harvard Square in 2007. And I've really learned a lot from her over the years. But you know, we were just reflecting in this panel a bit on, is it people, is it process, is it technology? And for those of you who don't know, I mean, I think Robin really did some great thinking about autonomous mobility many years ago and put together a very short video on sort of AV heaven and hell. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to look it up online. It's our choice as a society how we deploy technology. And in autonomous mobility, we can imagine great outcomes where we provide access to the elderly and the blind and so forth. And we can imagine terrible outcomes with zombie vehicles circling the building, waiting for you to finish your business meeting. And, so I think Robin has articulated that very well. And I just want to build on this concept that you just mentioned, Robin, which is about autonomy for children. And to turn to Kristin and Hyun-A and Sampriti, any reactions or reflections on that? It does seem to me to be an epic challenge in mobility. How do we move to a model where, and it's oftentimes women and mothers who are burdened with sort of shuttling children to anything from soccer practice to what have you. I just wonder, are there any thoughts or reactions on that comment? Maybe Hyun-A, start with you.
I mean, to me, I am an embracer of technology and advancements. And last week when we were in San Francisco, and I think Adam Grosser was mentioning some of the companies he's seeing out there who are developing ways to be able to make people who are blind or elderly have greater mobility through technology, through, I think he had one example of a sensing kind of technology that would provide that. And so to to me, the fact that technology would aid in being able to provide more autonomy to children in a way that's, of course, has to be comfortable for the parent, is a plus. And I think about in the context of what Robin mentioned about our current political environment, that I do hope that technology kind of transcends that and advances and creates that greater value that delivers greater, again, value to people.
Kristin, any thoughts on your side?
Many thoughts, but I'll try and keep them succinct things because I think we could do a whole nother session on that topic. But it goes back to remarks about this really isn't a technology problem. This is a people and process problem, because we have technologies that can be great equalizers, or they can be great dividers, to Robin's point about the heaven or hell issue. So it's really about two things. One is the people. And I see in the comment, too often we have these conversations about empowering women or queer people of color, and it's really put on our shoulders to help lift ourselves up. But really what we need to do, and I look to you, the Jinhuas, the Johns, and the others of the world, to really either lean out, to use a very common vernacular in the last 12 years in this space, but maybe, use your power to figure out how you can amplify us and lift us up and bring us into these leadership positions. And then to the second point about people and process is, we, with respect to process, to Robin's point, have a lot of policy questions and decisions to make, just not in America, but in the global citizenry, about how we're going to use technology. And we haven't come up with global policies between the EU, Asian countries, and North America, and how we're going to use technology to solve the great digital divide and not further exacerbate it.
Sampriti?
Yeah, the interesting question. And what I would like to say here is that, two parts to it is a little bit from our experience, which is like, how do you make systems that are safe, like especially when we are talking about kids' mobility or women, or it goes back to thinking about safety seriously. And it's something that I do when I build a very complex machine. I have to think about more than just, not just what kind of just safety for all people. And one thing we do is that we often have an open table, a discussion that we bring everybody and say, like, think of all the ways this thing can fail. I think here it is also the similar. So the future I look at is seamless multimodal transportation. And that means that every part of the system, how do you integrate reliability, safety? So, and in that, when I say safety, it means that also inclusivity, that you're actually thinking of all the entire spectrum of the population, whether that's kids, whether that's women, whether that's people with disability, right? And taking that into account, again, in the user-centric design, whether that's, again, from the technology perspective, whether that's a sensor stacks, whether that's algorithm, but more prior to that, you have to bring those people on the table. You got to have the whiteboard. It can be like crazy edge case ideas, but those all ideas need to be there, because I'm talking like a technologist, and I think in terms of algorithms. So all these ideas need to be there. When I am formulating my algorithm, I'm thinking of probability and how do I prioritize them. But the idea is that you have to have safety, inclusivity across the entire system, and it is really a structured process, and in which getting inputs is very, very important.
Absolutely. Seamless is the golden word in mobility, how to connect those modes in a way that makes it easier for all of us, including our children, to get around. Robin, just any quick reactions to any of these comments?
I did, just thinking about this, that the human-centered design and all the different types of people we have to care about. One of the things I want to call out is that when you are, if we're talking about people who want to be entrepreneurs from the very beginning idea, I think it is really hard and inappropriate to put on a nascent startup the idea that you're going to serve all people and all types of people. And I sometimes feel that policymakers who are clueless want to make that happen. So apply things that should be true when something is robust and everyone is using it to something that is just trying to get off the ground. And I sometimes get yelled at by people for saying that, but it is impossible to serve all people when you are a startup, that you've really got to just focus on what's the bulk of the need, and then you start adding. So that was my one comment.
Do you have the sense that that is sometimes poorly understood in transportation, in that, you know, like if you look at the history of the car industry, the earliest cars were for the wealthy. If you look at aviation, the earliest flights were for the wealthy. And we have to start somewhere. So maybe Sampriti, I mean, what you're doing, do you see this conflict between you have to serve everyone, but we also have to innovate?
Yeah, but like, you know, I have been very strong on that opinion, right? I mean, people sometimes will write, oh, this is $1 million boat for the wealthy people. I mean, no, like I'm trying to get the technology out there, and the most, you know, feasible way I can get there is not by making a ferry, because unless I'm getting paid for that and there is a scalability on that path, I cannot do that. So, you know, if you look at every technology that can scale, you have to, at 100%, whatever Robin said is exactly what we resonate with. Like you start with a, you know, a minimum viable product and a very, like what we call a beachhead market, right? And in our case, like, you know, our first transportation is a luxury. We have recreational buyers who have bought it for their super yachts even. And then we have hotels like Four Seasons and, you know, all the Brits of the world that use it as a luxury car shuttle, right? Our first step to transportation. And it's actually cool because it's interesting that when you build an aspirational product, if you make it cool among the people who are wealthy, then all the other people, you know, they think of it as cool. Because what I found is that people don't have like the positive thinking about ferry. You know, people think eVTOLs are so cool because, you know, investors use a private jet. They can think of themselves flying on a helicopter. They talk to them about a ferry, they're, you know, they're not excited, right? But when you like have this, like, okay, well, the people are taking a high speed, very cool water transit, and then that becomes aspirational as a eVTOL, that actually has a stronger way of like propagating to the mass. It's just also from the mindset perspective, but from a setting up a company perspective, right? You're limited in your resources, in your access. So you have to start somewhere. You have to find your beachhead market before you can, you know, scale it. But obviously the goal is to make it accessible at scale, you know, and that's the North Star.
John, and I do want to weigh in because I think it's very important. Right now, you're hearing from some private sector perspectives, but any civilized innovation should come from a partnership across academia, private sector, public sector. And what you're missing is a government perspective here. And so as the most recent former federal official, I would say that we still have an obligation in the government to serve all communities. And so that is the end goal. So to Robin's point, we have to pick one use case and solve it brilliantly. That's one of Google's mottos. But in so doing, we have to understand the gaps in the system. If we are not using systems thinking, we will continue to have pervasive gaps across not just any gender, but across many different identities.
That comment about systems thinking, I think, is one that I just put in the chat. Is I think there are some modes of transportation that at all times will be terrible modes, and we shouldn't be doing them. And so I want to just not give, at a system perspective, it's bad small and it's bad large. And don't ask me to name names, John, right now, because then I'll get people.
You know, I'm tempted. Okay. All right. Ellen Partridge had a question about shared mobility. She asked, shared mobility, including public transit and rideshare, seen by many as more fraught with danger for women than for men. How can women change that perception and reality?
Women shouldn't be changing it. All of us should, for starters.
Okay,
Sorry, go
let's
ahead.
start with that.
But
so,
also,
Kristin, shared mobility. Any thoughts from your side?
Well, Robin has some thoughts too.
Wait, just a quick thought. You
can
go.
Change. We have to make the system safer. I choose to have to take a more expensive ride share at TNC because I don't want to wait for 15 minutes on a cold, dark city street. That is not up to the city. That's not the city's fault. That is a systemic fault of us not funding these initiatives, not prioritizing them, and not valuing the voices of the underserved in our communities. Mic drop.
To add to that, just to point out a little bit behind your comment is, who would have thought in 2010 that women around the world, and I'd notice beautiful, young, spectacular women, are willing to get into an Uber or Lyft, and I think, oh my God, have cultural and statistical ideas changed? Because you would never, ever, 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 ever have done that. This person there's no government licensing, there's no something, and I'm getting in the car with this person. So I just want to say there's a huge amount. I want to distinguish between statistical realities and true safety issues. I think safety has a whole range of issues. Am I going to get raped and murdered, or am I going to go have someone just say annoying things to me that make me mad? But in any case, I just want to point out that TNCs are just such a crazy, I continue to be agog that women everywhere are willing to get into those cars. I do.
Other thoughts on shared mobility?
I mean, I think I agree with Kristin. I mean, I think it's not just, mobility. I think as a system and a society as a whole, how do you make it safe, right? It's not just one aspect. I mean, it's, I stay in San Francisco, even at 8 p.m. in certain streets, I'm scared. And, I have been mugged and attacked in the city. It was not pleasant. And I mean, it was terrifying. I stopped going out for a run, for example, in SF after that. And I've been in a crazy Uber where I had to, it wasn't even a ride share. It was just a crazy Uber driver where I felt so unsafe that I stepped out. There has been incidents, and I'm sure there has been incidents like this for many women. And I think it is not fixing just one part of the equation. It is entirely the society and, as a whole, right?
One vote for shared transport is eyes on the street. So there's so we've talked a lot about being on the street, but within a vehicle, if you're in a vehicle with a ton of other people versus in a vehicle by yourself and a driver, there are differences there.
Maybe just to close, because we're at time, there were lots of comments about human-centered design, building on your comments, Kristin. So there's design, there are questions about eVTOLs, there are questions about autonomous mobility. Maybe just really quick, any closing reflections from all of you on any of those very different topics? Robin?
eVTOLs. I think that has no place in dense urban areas.
Oh, this might have been one of those modes you were speaking to. Okay. Hyun-A, any thoughts?
Design is at the start of a solution, and human-centered design is a focus area that we need to embrace, as Kristin has stated.
Sampriti?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's eVTOLs, whether it's flying boats, I think that the thing that I always think of is that it's not about chasing the what sounds like a hype and what looks glittery. It is actually really looking into the practicality of things and really seeing what adds value, and also while building cities that are livable and really makes people's life better. Because sometimes we are too, I think, too drawn, or too drawn into science fiction rather than actually looking at that, what is the right thing. I mean, when we were building boats, people don't think moving on the water is cool, or as cool as eVTOLs, but how do we do, whether that's actually biking is better than always taking cars? How do we make practical solutions? And I think practical solutions are very under-marketed, to be honest.
Just for the record, I do think moving on the water is very cool and can be, in fact, quite pleasant.
Yes, very pleasant. I think it's really nice being one with the nature during your short work transit,
Yep. Kristin?
And John, we're at time, so I'll be brief. I just want to say two things. One is a note of gratitude for all of you taking time across the world to join us in conversation. We can only solve these problems in true partnership. And two, I'll close with one of my favorite quotations from Albert Einstein, who reminds us that we cannot solve the problem with the same tools that created it. So thank you, John, Jinhua, and MIT for convening us. And thank you, Hyun-A.
Wow. This is amazing. It's a wonderful discussion, particularly toward the second half. It's really warm up. I really like the dynamic here. The only thing I will reflect on is how each of us can really do to contribute, right? For example, I'm designing this mobility forum. I will invite the panelists to recommend to me other women leaders that I should invite and project their voice out, right? So help us, tell us what can we do to improve this? Yeah, so this also required to all the audience as well. So everybody, please join me. Thank the panel, Robin, Sampriti, Kristin, and Hyun-A for helping co-hosting the session today. Thank you so much, everyone.